In this video, we're going to make the cover of the book known as the case. We're going to start by getting 2 pieces of grey board larger than the book, and we're going to cut those to size. The size of the book is the height of the book plus 2 times the square, and the width from the shoulder to the foredge plus 1 square. Now the square is the overlap, the part that hangs over the edge of the book. Mark the boards that are front and back and start by straightening one edge. It's going to be the reference edge that we're going to work away from. So you make one edge straight and mark that. And then you make a corner square and mark the square corner, and we're going to work out from that square corner. Put the text block on the board and adjust the square to 3mm on the end that we'd squared up, and then mark the 3mm square at the foredge and the other end of the book. In this case it's the head. Why 3mm? Well, 3mm looks right for a book this size. If the book, and this is an A5 size book, so if it was an A4 size book, maybe you would go to 4mm, but I'd probably still use 3. Some people like to make the foredge square slightly larger, so they might use 3 for the head and the tail and 4 for the foredge, but I'm going to use 3 all around. Some people will make the tail slightly smaller, maybe 2mm, because they're worried about the text block dropping in the binding, but because we've done such a good job of rounding and backing this book, the text block, I'm confident the text block won't sag in this book. Once we've cut the 2 boards to size, we're going to mark out where the cloth is going to go on the cover. Now the style of binding we're going to do is a half binding, which has a strip of cloth on the spine and in the corners. So again, here's an example of what we're trying to achieve. So we're going to mark that out on the covers. Now the width of that spine piece is usually 1/4 to 1/5 of the width of the book. So we're going to use 1/4, so I'm going to measure from the outside of the spine to the foredge and then divide that by 4. Now the paper is going to overlap the cloth by 3mm, so once I divide it by 4, then I'm going to add 3mm for that overlap. And because I'm no good at measuring 1/2 millimeters, I'm going to round it down. I don't think anyone's going to notice a 2% change. So I'll measure from the outside of the spine onto the board 41 millimeters, but then I'm going to use a pair of dividers to transfer that to the head and the tail of this board and to the other board as well. That way I'll get it nice and even on both of the boards. So the corner measurement is 41 millimeters as well, diagonally in. So I'll get 41 millimeters on my dividers. Then I'll draw diagonal lines in from the corners and then measure the 41 millimeters in, and then another diagonal line where the cloth is going to go. If you compare that to a finished book, I hope it makes sense. And mark out the second board exactly the same way. Here's an example of the case that we're going to make. There's three things that we need to determine measurements for. The width of the cloth piece, that's the X, the distance between the boards, the Y, and the width of the spine stiffener, Z. We determine those measurements by measuring them directly off the book. So we put the boards in place, push them into the shoulders, then we get a scrap piece of paper and wrap it around the book and mark where the edge of the cloth is, where the edge of the board is, and where the shoulder is. And we do that on both sides. Now we can measure X, Y, and Z directly off this piece of paper. For the width of the cloth and the distance between the boards, we're going to add 2 millimeters because when we wrapped the piece of paper around the spine, we didn't have the manila spine stiffener in place. We add the extra 2 millimeters for the extra distance that we need to go around the spine stiffener. We'll start by cutting the spine cloth. So we'll straighten up an edge so we can measure from that. We'll measure the width of the piece of cloth. The spine stiffener is made of manila card. So we'll just straighten up an edge and then cut that to the correct width. And we'll also cut that to the same height as the boards. Finally, we're going to make a little jig. This is going to help us position the boards on the cloth. We're going to cut this to the distance between the boards. Now, a small inaccuracy will be multiplied by the angle of the board, so you do need to get this quite accurate. Before we start gluing things, I'll cut the corner pieces of cloth. Now these corner triangles can be larger than they need to be, or it's better if they're larger, and then we'll trim up the turn ends later. So make a little template and mark out the corner pieces and then cut them out. This little template is just made out of a bit of cardboard. You could use grey board, and it's a right angle triangle, and the two adjacent sides are 10 centimeters long. It's easy enough to make a template for yourself. For adhesive, I'm going to use a mix of 50% starch paste and 50% PVA. So I'm just going to force some paste through a strainer. I always do this 3 or 4 times before I use it. I'm going to mix some of it with PVA, just 50-50 mix. The only step I'll use straight paste for is for casing in, when I attach the text block to the inside of the case. I'll start by gluing the corner pieces in place. Now I'll glue the spine cloth in place. I'm just going to draw out the area on the cloth that I'm going to need to put adhesive on, just so I don't have to apply too much adhesive. To attach the second board, I'll use the spacer that I made earlier, and the boards have to be perfectly aligned. So I'll draw a line at the bottom, put the spacer in place, draw a line around the second board so I know where to apply the adhesive. Put the spacer in place and a ruler across the bottom so that that will also help align the boards. Everything well aligned and press down in place onto the cloth. The cloth ended up about 1/2 millimetre off the line. That's probably due to a rounding error at some point. I'm not going to worry about that too much. If I want to adjust something, I'll adjust the overlap with the board paper, and you will never notice that small difference. Made a little guide from grey board that's 15 millimetres wide, and I'm going to use that to trim the turn ends. I just make a new guide after I accidentally cut into it, but this one's lasted me quite a while. Go around the book and trim all the turn ends. We're going to do mitered corners on this book. For that you need to trim off the corners. The cloth needs to extend 1.5 times the board thickness away from the corner of the board. So the board is 2 millimetres, so you want about a 3 millimetre extension past the board. I cut corners by eye. Some people will use a jig, some people will measure it with a protractor. It doesn't need to be super precise. This is a step where I feel speed pays a higher dividend than being exactly 45 degrees. Apply the spine stiffener. Again, put a little bit of water on the upper side of the manila card. That'll make it curl in towards the cloth and make it easier to stick down. So put the adhesive on the manila card. Now it's time to do the turn-ins. Now bookbinders always do the head and tail before the foredge. Try not to apply too much adhesive, that will minimize the squeeze out, but you do try and get the adhesive into the top of the boards. Use a bone folder to turn the cloth over crisply and get a nice sharp fold at the top of the head and the tail. At the corners, use the bone folder or your thumbnail to push the little tab of cloth down into the edge of the board. And when you turn over the foredge, that'll make a really neat, strong corner. If you have a press, a quick nip of the case will make the cloth nice and flat. It will take out any little bumps. Now we're going to put the board paper on. Now the board paper overlaps the cloth by 3 millimeters. So I set 3 millimeters on my dividers and go around and mark that on the cloth so I know where the paper will go to. So I changed my mind about the paper design. I decided to go with this quite nice hand marbled paper. Line it up with the prick marks and then put a pencil mark on the marbled paper so it's easy to get back to that position later. Make sure that the marble pattern is combed down. That's the traditional way to use marble paper. Putting the paper carefully in place, you don't want it to move. Roll the corners over and crease it so that they're aligned with the prick marks on the corner. Just put a mark on the paper so you don't get the front and the back mixed up. Complete the folds at the corners and trim off the excess. Before applying the adhesive, put the paper in place and just crease along the edge of the boards, and that way you know where to put the adhesive to, and you won't over apply adhesive. All the steps in making the case use a mix of PVA and paste. And just put the adhesive on where it's going to adhere to the boards, and then pitch it to the prick marks. The wet paper will be fragile, so make sure you do your smoothing down under some rubbing down paper. Trim the turn-ins to 15mm and then glue them and turn them in. The order isn't important in this case because none of them are overlapping. Once you've got the turn-ins done, just flip the case over and run the bone folder down the edge of the boards on the spine cloth. Now just define the shoulders, and that's the case done.